So to remind my friends up here the rules of the game, each of us are going to be able to speak for about 7 minutes. And when this dinger goes off, and I try to prevent it from going off, but when you hear a little ding, that means shut up. And then the panelists, if need be, have an opportunity to ask each other a couple of questions. And then most important, all of you get to ask questions. So I'm going to start here with Dan. Talk a little bit about your philosophy on food and why plant-based is the best.
Hi, I'm Dan Ladermann. It's so great to be here. Our philosophy and mine is I grew up eating meat and potatoes in Ohio and spent at least 40 years eating the standard American diet. And one day, after hearing about raw foods and healthy lifestyle and the animals and the environment, I magically woke up and started what's been an amazing transformation of getting healthier and younger every year. And about 15 years ago, last month, I ended up at Hippocrates and took their 9-week health educator program and just saw what amazing transformation people can make when eating a good, healthy diet and taking care of the rest of the lifestyle issues and the thought processes and the exercise. And at the time, I was executive in startup companies in Silicon Valley, involved in the Unix and the Internet, and I decided at that time that I would rather spend my energy spreading the word about health and nutrition and vitality. And so I went back to Silicon Valley, started a nonprofit called the Institute for Vibrant Living, and started putting on events and bringing speakers like Brian, and Steve came to one of our events that we put on, and people from all over the world.
How about Cherie?
Well, I'll get there. I'll get there. And so it has been really rewarding spreading the information about health and well-being. And eventually, one of the events we had was a fundraising dinner, and Cherie came down and did a class and taught people how to make delicious food, and it was the result of that was our fundraising dinner for our nonprofit, and that's when I got to know Cherie a little bit better. And it was a slow start. I was still evolving, but what I found is I was doing events all over the world. It was a year of growth for me. I was traveling, doing raw food kayak trips, raw food trips in Bali. One was in Alaska, one was in Costa Rica, one was in Jamaica. And any time that Living Light was involved with an event, it was so well organized and so professionally done, and had such a beautiful woman at the head of the organization that I decided that's where I wanted to spend my energies and the kind of community I wanted to be involved in. And that's what I realized at the time is part of being healthy and being in a loving environment with yourself and your lifestyle is surrounding yourselves with people that are in that have those same goals. And in some cases that means pretty major changes, just like the radical changes that may have to happen in your diet and your lifestyle to achieve health. And I realized that Cherie and Living Light was where I wanted to spend my time, and so I started working my way into Living Light and Cherie's heart, and eventually it worked. So, it's really, healthy, being healthy, eating a healthy diet really has been really quite a life transformation for me, and it's remarkable the changes and the growth that can happen and the healing, and we'll talk more about it on Sunday when we have our talk.
Good. Thank you. Pass over the mic.
Okay, all right, I'll take this one.
She doesn't
I
need
have a question for you, Dan. I'd like to hear what you felt was the most challenging change in your diet when you were making your transition. Because I think a lot of people I mean, everybody has challenges. You're a cheeseaholic or a sugaraholic or a, whatever kind of holic.
In his case, a romance holic.
A romance holic. But what was your most challenging food or, the most challenging thing for you to get over?
There were probably two. The first was sweets. I still have a sweet tooth. Luckily, there's a wide variety of delicious raw vegan sweets that are available, but not on a regular basis. I love to make them on a regular basis part of my diet, but I know it's not a healthy thing to do, so I have to coordinate that. And the other thing, and control it, and the other thing is for letting go, I quit eating meat except for fish right away. Brian hadn't come out with his book Killer Fish yet, so I didn't have the ability to be educated on what it really meant. And so that was probably something that hung around in my diet. But salads and smoothies and green soups just were instant successes for me, and they took a big part of my diet. And it's been a transition, 41 years of eating a standard American diet, and it doesn't happen overnight. I didn't think I had any major challenges at the time, so it was more of a gentle transition. But I found there's a lot of things that improved.
That's it. Good. Honest. Good.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and even though we maybe don't have the numbers in the auditorium here that some of you have talked to me about that you would really have preferred to see, I know that everyone who is here for a reason, and you're going to make a difference in the world because you will go out and touch the lives of others. And also, I know we have a lot of people in our viewing audience, those who are watching us as we're live streamed. And I want to say that the quality of speakers here, I've learned so much in just the first day. I'm really excited. We still have 2 more days of this. And I just feel so motivated. I've just been taking reams of notes. I want to talk just a little bit about, because we're talking to some degree in this panel about anti-aging, how to incorporate more foods into your lifestyle that can keep you young and healthy. And at 66 years young, I have a little bit of experience with that. Thank you. And the anti-aging and beauty industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it is one that is really focused not on how you feel but how you look. And people think that if they change the way they look that they're going to be happy, they're going to feel good about themselves, and that's not necessarily what happens. They're still feeling inadequate inside. It's not until you empower yourself, until you feel like you're really taking control of your life, and that also means your choices, your daily choices, where you really feel good about who you are in your skin. And it's really important to recognize the necessity of making healthy choices. It's not, people ask me all the time if I'm 100% raw. I'm not 100% raw 100% of the time, and I don't strive to be, because it's not how raw you are, it's how healthy you are. I make good, healthy choices in everything that I eat. It's about fuel. Giving my body the fuel that it needs to operate this high-performance vehicle that I'm living in. And, we take better care of our cars than we do of our bodies, and we need to give ourselves the right fuel so that we can feel good when we wake up in the morning, feel like we have what we need, the energy that we need to take on tasks that give us fulfillment in life. Because when we make those choices and we have the energy, we can take on projects and ideas and complete ideas and be creative with our lives in a way that we just can't do when we're stuck in a body that isn't functioning at its optimal level. And so I say make good choices. Now on Sunday when Dan and I do our talk, we're going to talk about the kinds of foods that we incorporate in our lifestyle, the foods that we eat, the foods that we don't eat, the cooked foods that we eat, and why we choose to eat certain cooked foods. Because, as I said, we're not 100% raw 100% of the time by choice, but they're good choices. Why do we choose these? Why do we choose these methods of cooking, one method of cooking over another method of cooking? And it's all about getting the right fuel and doing the least damage, because some cooking methods don't just not give you enough nutrients, but they actually do harm by creating carcinogenic chemicals, by creating free radicals that damage healthy cells. And there are certain nutrients that you need that you don't want to cook particular vegetables and fruits that have these nutrients, because you need them to build collagen so you have beautiful skin, beautiful and strong muscle tissue and connective tissue. So the kinds of foods that you want to make choices, good choices about, we're going to be talking about that. And also how to make healthy living delicious. Because if it's not delicious, you're not going to eat it, right? You could hear all day long how important it is to make healthy choices, but if the food isn't delicious, you're just not going to choose to eat it. And that's our goal, is to make it delicious. And that's what we do in our school in California, Living Light Culinary Institute. We have people from now actually over 60 countries who come to our school. We have the only licensed culinary school in the world that is all raw vegan. And thank you. And I started the school, now it'll be 16 years ago. So we've been pioneering the raw vegan culinary movement for a long time. And I'm just excited every day to be able to get up and touch the lives of people, teach them how to make great tasting foods, and know that they're going out and teaching others. It's just exciting to me, and I love to share that. So, as I said, we'll be talking more about that on Sunday. Thank you. My dad always said, "Thanks for listening."
You were one of the few children that did listen. As I was listening to Cherie, it warmed my heart that, this is really balanced. And I think I have to give a lot of credit to my colleague Stephen, because we have powerful, intelligent, wonderful women here with us. It's just a male-dominated thing. So thanks for being here, Cherie, and being who you are. Now, my question to you, quite simply, is, did you really have a plan, or were you sort of led by the light of God to do all of this?
Did I have a plan led by the light of God?
40 years ago. 40 years ago.
40 years ago. No, actually, I'm going to tell a little bit more about my story on Sunday, but I was afraid, so afraid as a child that I would be stricken with all the diseases that I saw around me with my other family members. And I started experimenting with myself. And the first thing that I did was cut out animal products. And I wanted to have friends, and so I taught them how to eat the way I was eating. I'm a good cook. I was ever since I was a child. So I just started preparing good tasting food for people and started teaching it. And I have to say that when I went to the Ann Wigmore Institute in 1991, I think, and I met Dr. Ann, and I saw what I thought were miracles. Now I know that it's just a natural process. You take away the foods that are doing harm, and you give the foods that are high in fuel, and the body heals. But what I saw was, to me, miraculous, and I recognized that I could no longer continue to teach cooking. That I had to create a raw cuisine that would satisfy people in the same way, but that would not do harm to the body, and that would give it the fuel that it needed to heal and to maintain good health and vitality. And so I thank Dr. Ann for her wisdom, and also for Viktoras Kovenskis for motivating me laugh because he sat me down one day and he said, "You must teach chefs. You have to teach chefs how to make this food that you've created because everybody on the planet needs to be able to eat like this." And so I really had no idea what I was getting into when I started living light. but
it's hard to believe,
I'm really
16 years, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't even believe it's been 16 years. Yeah. So, anyway, pardon? Can't hear.
Make sure you're talking to the mic.
Am I not talking into the mic? I'm sorry. Did
All right,
anybody?
well, let's
Okay.
give Cherie a big hand.
Okay, thank you.
Now we go to my buddy Stephen.
All right.
Well, I started out as a little sprout.
That's what your wife says now?
And you know how it works over the years, a little sunshine, a little water, and, one blossoms into a mature green. And I didn't know I was going on this path either. I had childhood allergies and asthma, and I spent almost 20 years, 19 and a half years, working with allopathic medicine, working with the best conventional doctors. They were heads, chairmen of their departments at major hospitals. And things were not progressing except in the wrong direction. Allergies really worsened. Instead of just being allergic to pollen and ragweed, then I started being allergic to grasses and cats and dogs. And, I was a kid. I just went along with, what do you do? Doctors are authority figures. You go to them because they have the answers. So I thought. But I noticed that when it started to extend to asthma, and at some point I was now in my early 20s, so I was on my own, I started to try to experiment. I started to read. I started to educate myself. I was looking for solutions, and thank God I had the drive and the passion to seek solutions and to solve problems. And I think that's really a requirement because we may know how to cure every disease, but we don't necessarily know how to cure every person. And that's because we as individuals have to put so much effort and energy into our own healing. It's not done by waving some magic wand by someone outside of us. So I had, thankfully, that energy. And in 1975, after my allergist offered me some drugs and told me to just sign the paper here and he would be giving me the drugs for free, I thought, well, this guy's never been very nice. All of a sudden, he's turning into Mr. Warmth. What's behind here? And when I left the office, I realized I was being a guinea pig for some new drugs. And I didn't really, thankfully, he had such a bad bedside manner. He was so unappealing, and I realized that he was trying to pull the wool over my eyes. He couldn't be straight about it. That I decided never to go back. And I went out on my own and I started reading things like Arnold Ehret's mucusless diet system. And I said, this is it. I've got to do that. I've got too much mucus. Of course, at the time, I was walking around with pockets full of tissues because there was always something dripping out of me. And, it was just a way of life for me at that point. But I think what's most important is I took control of my own health path. I made a decision that I wasn't going back to conventional medicine. I was on my own, and I would explore other ideas. And the first thing I did was, I had my last meal at the Big Whopper.
Remember the Big Whopper?
I had one of those, and that was it. After that, I became a vegan. I started fasting. I got myself a champion juicer. Once upon a time, was the leading juicer selling in the U.S., and I started at it. And the first thing I did was go on a fast, and I loved it so much. I went on another fast, and then I went for 30 days, and then I did a big one, which was 100 days. And truth be told, I should have quit around 92. But I dragged myself to achieve that magic number of 100. But I learned a lesson, which was that we have to listen to our body. When your body talks to you, you have to, our heads are only about 12 inches away from our stomachs. And we should be able to make that short connection. So I'm very tuned in to how I feel and what I eat. And I'm very sensitive to what I put inside me every day. And also the quantity. Because, I think you'll agree, we consume probably twice the volume of food that we actually need. And let me tell you, that second half goes to no good. The only thing it serves is lining the pockets of the American Medical Association. It does you and I no good. So eating less became a big thing for me, and the benefits that I got from fasting and juicing, and then growing my own food. That's when I met Victoris and Dr. Ann, and I saw they were growing all their food, and I lived in a New York City apartment. This was my home, New York. Not this beautiful theater, but, I was up there.
Nice house.
14th floor above the sidewalks of New York, and that's when I decided to get into the gardening. And I, like everything else, I took a little different turn on it. I saw, well, if they're growing buckwheat and sunflower and wheatgrass, and what about peas? And that's when I started, back in the day when I started growing peas, it wasn't the green pea we have today, it was a red pea. It was called China red pea. But it looks exactly the same, and I'm proud to say that now you can find green pea shoots in all of the stores. All the major growers are doing it. But, I had that flair for invention and exploration, and that's what helped me heal myself. And my healing was so rapid, and it was so dramatic, that I really had to change my whole mindset about how is this that I could accomplish so much in such a short period of time, and conventional medicine, with all their degrees and with all the placards on their walls, couldn't help me. And it wasn't just me, because I would interview my fellow patients in the waiting room, and we would talk, and I would ask them how they're doing, and I would find their complaints the same as my own. So I realized I was not alone. And I look at medical doctors for issues like autoimmune disease, like allergies. I look at them as they're just in the wrong business. It's like giving plumber's work to an electrician. It's not their fault. It's just not their line of work. And that's where you need to have this holistic approach and this natural approach. And, as I was saying in my talk earlier, food is your medicine. And especially when you get highly functional foods like the juices and the baby vegetables, the sprouts, the green leaves. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Either of you have a question for Stephen? Okay. Great job, Stephen. So back when I became a vegetarian, it was not for health reasons. It wasn't for anything like that. It was for moral reasons. And shortly after I made that choice, my health dramatically, just like Stephen pointed out, radically changed. Now, I had an inquisitive mind, and I wanted to know why that was working. And one summer I'm already done. One summer I happened to be living in the state of Oregon. It was very hot. I lived in southern Oregon, and starting in the beginning of May until October, it was 100 degrees every day and sunny. And I just gravitated to a raw food diet, and I was eating 100% raw food for about 3 months when I finally realized it. And I said, gee, I've never felt this way in my life. And when I say feel this way, it wasn't really a physical feeling. It was like this elation that came over. And I remember I read this really odd woman's book called Be Your Own Doctor, that I didn't believe a word of, by the way, when I was chopping down, a lot of cooked vegan food. And I said, well, I have to pick that up and read it again. And my then wife, we were about ready to open a health center on the Oregon coast. We were going to open that in the spring and have it until the autumn and hike and put people on vegan diets, etc. And she had never lived in the East, so she chose Maine, which was sort of like the East Coast version of Oregon. And I said, since we're here and I was coming off a 40-day fast, I never went up to your 100-day fast. I probably would have died. I would have been eating the wallpaper or something at that point. I went down to visit Ann Wigmore, and they asked me to work there, and I had no intention. I think, it was like 20 below zero like it was here the other day. And I never hear voices. I'm not one of those lucky guys who think they're spiritual. But I heard a voice that night and said, do this. And I never looked back. And shortly after working there, they sent me over to Europe, where I brought the message of raw food back to Europe. In modern times, it came from there. The natural hygiene movement started literally in the mid-1800s, and then Arnold Ehret around 110 years ago. And then, of course, the raw living food movement, where the word living food came from, was Dr. Christine Nolfi. And it was like a miracle. I was invited to direct the original Living Food Center in Denmark for a year. And I was actually working with two people that worked with Dr. Nolfi. And her story was amazing. She was a medical doctor 100 years ago, had breast cancer, and went on raw food and recovered from it. And they were so gracious about her recovery, they took her medical license away. So the politics existed then, not only today. And I came back in 1980. They asked me to direct Hippocrates. And my ambition, not my intelligence, said yes. And I said, under certain conditions, we have to figure out what we've been doing here since 1956. I said, I watch all these people get well, and if I ask Victoris or Ann Wigmore or 10 other doctors who know what we're doing, or me, we all have different answers. We didn't know why people got well. We didn't know why people remained young on this diet. And I said, we have to do that work. And they agreed. And so I started to pursue that in the not so efficient, not so scientific way that I was capable of doing it, and then brought colleagues and friends into that picture. And within a matter of about 10 years, we realized why the raw living food heals and prevents premature aging is it has 4 elements in it that are now vaguely talked about, but really not talked about in the scientific community at all in a serious way. The first was what? Anyone know what that is? Hormones. Now, all of you know about bioidentical hormones here, don't you? Of course. And so you get bioidentical hormones from plants. All plants that you don't process have hormones in them. And by the way, hormones are incredibly important for the human body. They're actually the way that your cells communicate with one another. And if those cells are not communicating, they mutate and they do very horrible things to you. And if you're lucky, they become cysts and they become fibroids. And if you're not lucky, they become cancer. So hormones are in those foods. Wow. And oxygen's in those foods. And when Cherie was teaching cooking, the fragrance of her food that was so delightful to all of her students was the oxygen molecule leaving it. And so that's what you're actually feeling. And back in 1917, a Nobel Prize was given to a doctor who showed us that you cannot ingest nutrients, vitamins, minerals, proteins, without oxygen being present with it. Where is oxygen present with nutrients? In raw food. Not raw meat. There's no such thing as raw meat. There's no raw fish. Uncooked fish, uncooked meat is not raw. It's dead. It's lacking what? The oxygen. It's lacking hormones, lacking the other elements. The next thing, it took us until really 1993 to figure out. So it wasn't 10 years. That was unfair. First 3 we figured out. So it used to be hormones, oxygen, and enzymes. And 1993, I had read this remarkable study that was done at Hopkins that Stephen showed a little bit of that and a lot more today in his presentation. They did a study on cancer because Generation X, not my generation, the baby boom, which, by the way, this year, 2014, the youngest baby boomer is going to be 50 years old. How many of you know that? This is the year. And so Generation X didn't buy all the propaganda and corporate interests like we did. And pharmaceuticals recognized this and said, we're going to have to create a whole new world in the next generation of pharmaceuticals that are more plant-based or more natural-oriented. So they commissioned Hopkins, which has a remarkably good, compared to others, research wing. And they said, well, let's look at the people who have really bad diets, but they eat something that prevent them from getting cancer, and the Russians popped right up. I mean, if you look at the Russian diet, if I wanted to kill you, I'd put you on the Russian diet. It's even worse than the American diet. When I went to Russia to teach, I had to smuggle in vegetables. That's not a joke. And they kept saying, oh, you like borscht? I was so sick of borscht by the time I left Russia, I swear I'd never go back again. So anyway, they looked at the Russians, and some of the Russians were traditionally eating the cabbage and fermented cabbage, and they weren't getting cancer. We're in the cities in Moscow, et cetera, where they gave up the traditional and were not eating a lot of fermented foods and cabbage food. They were getting the same and more cancer rates than other Europeans were. So they then looked at the cabbage family and found out broccoli, and if you remember, Daddy Bush put his foot in his mouth. He said, I don't like broccoli. Remember that? Well, that was in response to this Hopkins study of 92. But then a graduate student of that study said, basically, if the broccoli is good, let's sprout broccoli. And they found out it has this remarkable phytochemical. So first is hormones, the language chemistry between cells, oxygen, which allows nutrients to digest, and phytochemicals, which are a spiritual description. And I don't say this in a light way. That plants that came to this earth billions of years ago, with a B, have elements in it that heal and prevent disease and premature aging in humans that didn't show up in this form until 10,000 years ago. Now let me repeat what I just said so you really get this, out there in the world and here in the room. Plants that have been around for hundreds of millions and billions of years, in their origin of those plants, developed phytochemicals, chemistry in it, that prevent diseases for humans, and we didn't show up, Homo sapiens, until about 10,000 years ago. Amazing stuff. And I now write books for the academic community. 2 of them are out there, of my 3-volume series called Food is Medicine, and all it has is prestigious university research studies on phytochemicals. And we now know there's a body of evidence in science how each and every fruit, vegetable, and more so sprouts than anything else, prevent and eliminate disease. And once that study started to happen here and then around the world, yearly now there's billions put into this, we figured out why Hippocrates has been so helpful in allowing people to reverse stage 4 diseases. We didn't really understand it until the pharmaceuticals, interesting enough, funded studies. Now, they did it for what reason? To put pills in a bottle and sell you $2,000 a month worth. So we have to cherry pick, as we said earlier in the panel about that. And the last one is enzymes. And the raw food community gets really excited about enzymes. And a lot of them have this whole thing wrong. Enzymes are not what you're taught in school as a scientist. And how many of you have science background here? Yeah, we're told that an enzyme is a protein. Well, that's in part true, but that's like me saying a car is just metal. Well, sure, it is just metal, but what's the purpose of a car? And the purpose of an enzyme is to carry electric into your electric body. And that's why we know that the digestive process, which is an ionic, an electromagnetic frequency process, occurs only with living food. So the little bit of cooked food that I choose to eat now and Cherie chooses to eat and wisely selects these food, we have to make sure that we're not eating too much of it and the wrong kind of it, because those foods will never truly digest in the body because they don't have, once you cook them, what? Enzymes. But guess what? They don't have hormones, and they don't have oxygen, and they don't have phytochemicals, and they don't have enzymes. Hope. And once you cook the food, it is not a healing food. It turns into caloric energy. And the best you can get out of it is a few minutes or an hour of synthetic energy. When you take living food with ionic electromagnetic frequencies in it, you're getting what your body needs. Ionic electromagnetic frequency. That's how we function. And this is the transformation that we have to make in the nutritional field. And I write a lot about this now. I'm in the middle of writing a book called Quantum Biology on this. And once we make that transition and leave in the past the micronutrients and how much protein does it have and how much vitamin, and really ask the most pertinent question, how much energy is in this food? How much life is in this food? Then we're really in the 21st century when it comes to science. Any questions?
From all your years at Hippocrates, what would you say is your most fulfilling part of running the center?
Years ago, we decided to have a commencement, a graduation, every Friday. And we do that 52 weeks a year because Hippocrates doesn't close. And every week I have to hold back my tears. I've seen this, I've worked with over 200,000 people. And I've seen it thousands of times, but it never stops fulfilling me and making me happy and elating me to watch what people can do once they take back their lives, once they realize that they're capable. It's just such a rewarding and enriching feeling. Probably the second thing is when young people, which is a chronic problem, 1/3 of the people in Europe and the United States that are married who can't have children now, they come to us and then they have babies. They bring their babies back. I'll never forget about 20 years ago, we had a woman come to us. We knew her 30-some-year-old children, and she came back to us with her young husband, who was 15 years younger, and she was probably 55 at the time, and said, I want to have babies. Now, quietly, I didn't know if she had told her husband her tubes were tied, so I didn't mention that. But after he left the room, I said, what are you going to do about the tubes? And she had her tubes untied, and she had 2 miscarriages, and then at 58 years old, had her boy, who I just saw, he's about 6'3", and he, at 16 years old, was putting together a plane that he was flying across the United States. And I remember when she brought that little boy back in, about a year after she had him, and the whole group of us, 50, 60 of us, were crying like babies, and said, not only did I come here years ago and heal a disease that doctors couldn't find out what it was or help me with for more than a decade, but the most important thing that happened is this lifestyle gave me a baby. So that was fulfilling, and we used to have pictures of a lot of babies that people couldn't have before. Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question for you, Brian. I know you travel a tremendous amount, and Dan and I did a world tour in 2013 to promote our book, Raw Food for Dummies. And fortunately for us, and perhaps this is true for you too, we had hosts everywhere we went to make sure that we had the right kind of fuel that that we were accustomed to, that we had our juices and our greens and everything was organic and so forth. But there were times that it was extremely challenging.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm finding it challenging being here in New York without a car, or I guess most people don't have cars, though, do they? I mean, there's no...
Only the very rich here.
And it's very cold, and so, walking around, trying to get organic food has been really difficult. So I'm just asking, how do you do it?
Well, I'm fortunate because at this point in my life, I pretty much go to places where there are health stores, organic food, juice bars. For instance, I got in a cab today, went down and got a green drink and a wheatgrass shot in a place called Juice Generation, which is about a half a block from Whole Foods, where I brought back about $100 of liquids. So on times I cannot get that, I'll even drink cooked coconut water or get raw coconut water, which I could today there, and eat little food or get juices, and that's basically it. There are some places that you may have visited that I occasionally go to. It's more difficult, but write this down. HappyCow.com will save your ass. HappyCow.com. It really is amazing stuff. I'll never forget my very efficient former assistant put HappyCow.com in Paris, and I told her, you don't need to do that. I know all the places in Paris. And I'd stayed at this hotel probably 150 times. And she put it in there, and I got a little fussy when I found it. And I looked, and a half a block away on the same side of the street of the hotel was probably the best biological, organic. I walked by it 1,000 times, never saw it. So, there are ways to do that. And as you know, at the beginning, when you start this, you're going to want to eat a lot. I mean, what I feed all of the 150, 200 people that eat at Hippocrates every day, I used to eat on my own when I started this. So I was still eating emotionally at that stage. But after the years that all of us have done this, I mean, how many years have you been doing this, Stephen?
Since 1975.
So 1975. Cherie?
Raw or
Just vegan diets.
oh, a vegan diet? Oh, 35 years.
Dan?
18.
Okay, so by this point, you know, don't look at us and say, it's pretty easy for us not to eat. It's pretty easy for us not to, you know. But
Yeah, I would rather not eat than eat something that's going to make me feel like crap.
Exactly. You know, at the early stage, you don't have that option. I know I wouldn't have done it. I would have thought I was starving and dying and God knows what, crying and getting the violin out. But you'll find ways, like these baby greens, spring greens. They may not all be grown in perfect organic soil, but they're all organic. In the northern climates, they're grown inside, and they're not sprayed. You can get baby greens everywhere. Asparagus. They tried to put chemicals on that years ago. It died. So all asparagus is pretty much grown organically. Watercress is all grown organically. Now, God knows what they do after that, but you can survive on these things. And taking things like supplemental algaes, flower pollens or bee pollens, these are incredible nutritious foods with a lot of what? Life force in it, a lot of energy in it. Okay, well, thanks for the questions. Now we're going to have the guest go up to the microphones to the right and left side of the auditorium if you have any questions. Nobody has any questions? Okay, here we go. We'll start here on the right side.
I have a question regarding the digestibility of some kinds of buffets that are put out that are vegan, and I feel like there's so many nuts involved that it's almost impossible to digest them, and also the larger bean sprouts, but mostly the nuts and the quantity of nuts that are mixed into everything.
A lot of raw food chefs lose sight of the reason why they got involved in this kind of lifestyle in the first place, and they want to make food that satisfies people, and so they use a lot of nuts. What you have to do when you go to these potlucks and buffets is you just have to really be wise. Don't think that it's going to hurt people's feelings if you don't eat everything. Just choose the foods that are going to serve you best. Load up your plate with a lot of greens. You don't even have to eat the dressing that they prepare. Oftentimes the dressing is just full of oil and sugar and vinegar, and what a caustic combination that is. You want to go away with a lot of air in your gut, eat some of these dressings. But a lot of times people will bring avocados, and that, if you have an avocado with your salad, that can be satisfying. Choose the foods that serve you. I'm not a nut-phobic. I'm not afraid of eating nuts, but you certainly can't make that a large part of your diet. A little bit goes a long way.
And certainly if you're going to eat the bigger nuts like almonds, you should be soaking them first. It makes them more digestible. But if you're talking about shelled sunflower seeds or sesame seeds, those are small enough, they're more digestible. But I think some discipline is required when eating nuts, because you can easily put a handful of nuts, in your hand and chug it down. And that's very hard on your digestive system. These are complex foods, they're mixtures of protein and fat, and they're very concentrated. So we have to be mindful of portion size when it comes to nuts, very much so. And it's too easy to overdo it because it's finger food, it's quick. It's fast, it's like a snack, but you could be consuming. And on the subject of nuts, I think peanut butter is kind of the worst offender, because any kind of nut butter concentrates those nuts even more. So things like almond butter and peanut butter, so many of us are guilty of smearing on these, half-inch thick layers of peanut butter on something. And honestly, we were never designed to consume that kind of density. Because truly, I mean, if you were going to eat peanuts, the proper way would be to spend the time to break it open out of its shell. And let me tell you, if you had to do that, you would be done in 15 minutes, and might be, maybe you had like 20 peanuts, but that's nothing in comparison to what you smear on, your peanut butter on your bread or whatever. It's something to be very watchful about, and try thinking also about portion size and also pre-soaking them.
And I have another suggestion as well. When I'm going to go to a restaurant, or I'm going to go out to dinner at someone's house, I have a big salad before I go, so that I'm not hungry enough that I'm going to make poor choices and overeat foods that are just not going to make me feel good.
Just two comments on nuts. In the United States, you cannot buy raw nuts anymore, more out of California. That's part of the international Codex rulings that the food industry and pharmaceutical are trying to manipulate all of this. And so that's number one. Number two, why we overeat nuts, and I got hemorrhoids when I started this, because you're eating out of emotions. You really don't need heavy food, but initially, because you're so used to squelching and squelching your emotional state with heavy, you give up the meats, you give up the soy burgers, whatever it would be. We tend to overeat nuts and seeds. So that's the issue in most of our cases. I know it was for me at the beginning. Okay, over on this side.
Yes, I had two questions about liquids. One is about vinegar. When I was at Hippocrates, we were told not to eat vinegar, also at Living Light. And I'd like your answers to when people talk about apple cider vinegar as though that were the cure-all. So what do you say to people? I'm a little confused about that. The second question is about kombucha. And I know you talked about this, Brian, at Hippocrates. And there are a lot of people now making their own, as well as you buy it in the store. And as a recovering alcoholic with 20 years of sobriety, I know that once I have one, I want to have every one. So I know there's something wrong with it, and I wonder if you'd articulate, because I think there are a lot of people that feel like these are really health foods.
Okay, number one, raw apple cider vinegar is miraculous. All of this acid alkaline, which is overblown but certainly important. I don't find anything that is more effective that can rapidly balance the acid-alkaline balance within the bloodstream. The exception to that is if you have candida, fungal, or yeast problems. You avoid it. But you take it on its own. You don't take it on food. Now, if I were to give you raw organic apple cider vinegar and put it in your mouth and said, what do you feel? You'd all say, I'm puckering. Your mouth goes like this. It puckers. When you're puckering, what's happening is you're killing not only the bad guys there. That's why apple cider vinegar is good. It kills microbes. But it also wipes out the enzymes that digest food. So how about if I take it and put it on my salad, and notice the cultures that eat the most of it eat highly acid diets. The French, the Italians, the Greeks, etc. Highly, highly acid diets. So they tend to want something that alkalizes. They don't even know why. It's become a flavor or a taste for them. They don't get that it's an instinctual thing that their bodies are saying, please alkalize me. And you put it on that salad or whatever you're putting it on, that food cannot and will not digest in the body. So that's it. Kombucha is an absolute fraud. It's a joke. If I wanted to get you sick, I'd give you kombucha. You put water in a container, you put sugar in a container, and it ferments. Now, I don't want you to have sugar if you're the healthiest person in the world. This is white sugar in almost every case. To top it all off, the commercial companies now put agave syrup in with it or honey in it. And it has about an 8% alcohol content. So you don't have to be an alcoholic to want that. You have to be a sugar addict like every one of us, including I am here. The difference between active sugar addicts and inactive sugar addicts is we're all addicts. I'm still a sugar addict. I just choose not to take kombucha and lots of sugar because I'm like you. I was never an alcoholic. I would have been, I'm sure. I opened up cookies. I ate the whole box. I opened a watermelon when I was a raw fruit nut. I'd eat 30-pound watermelons. So I get that. And so kombucha is just fulfilling a very addictive personality to get alcohol under the auspices of this is really a health food, just like a lot of these, quote, health foods are. They're really just the same old in an organic package at this point. So again, if I wanted to get you sick, I would give you sugar water that fermented into a not so good bacteria. There are some good bacteria in, but not so good bacteria are in there too. Back when we were using Rejuvelac at Hippocrates, thank goodness there were 4 of us in the world that were known as leaders in raw food then. This is before the raw food movement. 3 of us were in a room. Anne was not there. And all of us looked at one another and said, are you drinking Rejuvelac? Not one of us were, but the next day I was going to get up in front of a group and tell them to do it. Now, we all had our excuses. Oh, we don't need it anymore. We're too good for it. All this bullshit. The truth is we didn't like it. And there happened to be a guy in there who worked at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and he said, well, let's study it. Let's test it. I can go into the labs up there, and we can test it. And he called us a week and a half later and said, let's rename it. Called it Rejuverat. Because he said, yeah, it has a few good bacteria in it, but 6 out of 10 batches that we made under the Hippocrates recipe, had unfriendly bacteria in it. So great idea, great concept, philosophically wonderful, but not true. Now, if you want good bacteria, we stabilize them, we culturize them, we actually make them almost suspended animation now. You don't even need refrigeration. Bacteria you can get. But by the way, the medical field, just like it's led us to understand more about phytochemicals, are now going in the next 10 years through fecal implantation into human bodies, etc., are going to teach us really more about bacteria than we know in the alternative field at this point. It's good for you, necessary, everyone needs it, but frankly, even the best of us don't really know what the hell we're talking about with this. Another $10 billion worth of research, we're going to be able to come here and say, here are the bacteria you need in your body, but it's certainly not from kombucha tea. Once again, I'll repeat. Hippocrates Health Institute has not used Rejuvelac for 30 years. I'll repeat once again. 4 of us were called leaders. One was Ann Wigmore in raw food then. There were no other leaders in the world known as leaders. 3 of us were not drinking Rejuvelac. And I won't name names, but the reality is when we studied it at the University of Massachusetts, not we, but the guy who worked there, he said, when I tested these, 6 out of 10 batches had highly unfriendly bacteria to moderately unfriendly bacteria. So when I was drinking that Rejuvelac, why he called it Rejuverat, I could have infected my body with microbes and weakened my what system? Immune system. Now that's a fact. I would love to tell you a love story, but it's not going to be true.
Yeah, and at the time, when Ann Wigmore was teaching about Rejuvelac, I got into it and I made all kinds of different varieties, and in my recipe book, there's several different versions of it. But what I found in practice is that making Rejuvelac required somewhat of a skill, and it was somewhat of an art to make it correctly and properly. You know, it had to taste just tart, and it had to be sour. But if you had the temperature a little bit too high, if you let it go a little bit too long in time, then you get the wrong kind of bacteria. So I also came to the conclusion, when I heard you stopped, I immediately knew why. Because the majority of students were unable to successfully make the recipe with the correct bacteria on a repeated basis. And it was too risky to have to be creating a beverage with bad bacteria in it. And that was the reality. It was too difficult to make successfully and correctly.
And by the way, it wasn't Hippocrates that invented that. If you go to Slavic countries now, if you go to Lithuania now, if you go to Bavaria in Germany, they still use this. It's a traditional drink.
And I'd like to say something more about vinegar and in dressings. In all 4 of my books that I've written, I don't have any vinegar in any of them. I've not used vinegar for 40 years, because I experience the effects of vinegar in my own body. If I ingest vinegar, I feel bloated, not necessarily gassy, but I feel like I ate too much food when I know I didn't. My belt buckle gets, my belt gets too tight. I just know that it's not good for me. And you can create delicious foods using other kinds of acidic components like lemons, even orange. A little bit of orange in a dressing gives both sweet and sour flavors. So you can use a little bit of pineapple with lemon to give a little sweet and sour flavoring in dressings. So you can use acidic ingredients that are not vinegar, that don't create that same kind of havoc with your digestion. It's not difficult. You don't have to depend on vinegar.
When Cherie bloats up, she goes from a size 0 to a size 1. We go over to this side now.
Hi, Brian. I eat a vegan diet, and I suffer from migraines often. And I'm wondering if you could tell me what foods to stay away from, if there are a list of foods, and then when I have a migraine, what foods should I eat? Because I do know it's food related.
If you know it's food related, you may have an allergy to glutinous foods, the obvious ones. I know you're not taking dairy food at this point. Foods that literally are flour product based often give allergens to people because the histamine levels are thrown off. So you may be one of those people with migraines that you have a rush of histamine because you may not even have a gluten allergy but have a reactive chemical reaction to what the flour product does. And so that's the first one I'd look at. I would go for a month without taking any flour products at all, even sprouted. Just stay away from everything. Rule out things. This is better than going to an allergen doctor. Number 2, look at sugars. And sugars, we find that more people through the SpectraCell testing we do have a fructose allergy than they do a glucose allergy, which is interesting. And why? Because high fructose corn syrup was part of your diet, my diet, as we were growing up. And most children today, they're going to be worse than we are. But the fact is that that's another one. So look at everything from the fruits you eat, worse than that extraction of, sugars from those fruits in any way. And then the obvious usual suspects, the white sugars, the honeys, all of these types of things. Then the last thing I would do is look at food combining. I mean, I know I never really much had headaches, but I used to have headaches on and off when I didn't combine food correctly. And food would ferment in my intestinal tract. And each person's different. Some people have very rapid metabolisms, and they don't have that effect. You may have a moderate. I would assume you have a more moderate metabolism, and that could in and of itself be what it is. And then, in 3 months, you go through all of those. Each month you get rid of one of them, and you should know at that point.
Okay.
And may I also just say processed foods. If you eat any processed foods at all, there are a lot of food chemicals that might be considered safe for the general population, but you could be having a reaction to anything, xanthan gum or any of those kinds of stabilizing or ingredients that are pretty commonly used in processed foods, even in so-called healthy food.
One good way of finding out which foods you're sensitive to is to take a week off from food, to go on a fast for a week. And then, once you've cleansed your system, reintroduce the foods you're suspicious of, one at a time, and give yourself 15 minutes to see if you have any kind of response to it. And you might discover that there are some offensive foods there.
Yeah, for healthy people, that's a great suggestion. A green juice fast.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Here we are.
Hi. What do you think of the sweetener stevia, or do you have a different sweetener of choice if you were going to put something sweet? And do you recommend that we try to eat fermented foods in our diet, like tempeh and things like that? I mean, do you think fermented foods are good things?
Let's start. Dan or Cherie?
Well, stevia is the only sweetener that I'm aware of that is a non-glucose sweetener that is not like saccharin or NutraSweet. Yeah, so it's not glucose related. So it's not going to affect diabetes. It's not going to have the same effect. It's not going to my awareness, it's not going to feed pathogenic bacteria like Candida or yeasts. So it's a safe sweetener. However, be aware that some of the big sweetener companies that make little packets of sugar and aspartame and what is it? It's called sucralose. All of those products now, those companies have now adopted stevia as well, and they're genetically modifying it in several cases. So when you see stevia in those little packets, and it's from one of those big companies, it could very well be genetically modified. I think their reason for it is they wanted to get rid of the aftertaste. First, there's different ways of processing stevia. The original stuff is a green powder, all right, and that has a lot of flavor to it. That may not work well in your cup of coffee, right, because it's going to impart its own flavor. So some of the natural products manufacturers have a way of processing it so that it's less of a flavor, it's more neutral, and it's whiter. But the big companies are doing this with genetic modification. And so I'm suspicious of all of that.
I want to jump in and say, because of this, and then we'll go on. One of our alumnus was gracious enough to correct me because why we save stevia. Stevia was going to be put off the market in the United States, as it is in many European countries. The sugar lobby is so strong that they literally wipe out stevia because it's a healthy thing for you. And I assumed that Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola that saved it in this country, stevia, were putting it in zero, and she corrected me today. They put it in vitamin water and more health-oriented. But this has aspartame in it. Aspartame was outlawed, by the way, under the Reagan administration, and one of his closest colleagues, Reagan, basically pushed to have it approved, and when he left the administration, was making $2 million a year back 30 years ago, I guess 25, 30 years ago, as a consultant to the aspartame industry. I have a book in my office, medical book, this thick and that large, Aspartame Disease, starting with brain cancer. And I'm sorry I interrupted, but I wanted to correct what I had said before.
The stevia that you're talking about, also some of these packets of white stevia have a lot of different fillers in them so that you can use them, you can measure them more easily because stevia is so concentrated that if you just use a little bit too much dust, then that flavor that you're talking about that's kind of almost a licorice chemical flavor takes over, and you just can't appreciate the other food, the food that you're eating. So they add a lot of chemicals or fillers so that you can use more of it without changing the flavor. So you need to know what those fillers are. Excuse me.
There's an article in the New York Times magazine section last Sunday, the whole article about the production of stevia and all its offshoots like Truvia and all kinds of stuff.
Truvia. That's one of them.
Truvia is half sugar, isn't it? It's half white sugar. Yeah. Xylitol is sugar.
Yeah. And I personally, as I said earlier, is I do have a sweet tooth, and to get myself cut back, is stevia was a useful tool. And what I found is to use a little bit of stevia and still use as much of natural sweeteners if I'm going to use some in what I'm doing, and it allows me to cut the amount of sugar way down and not have the stevia taste. Because if you're trying to use stevia, it's one good way to get off sugar, because you'll find you just don't like it if you get one drop too much.
Okay, we'll have the last. What time is it?
9:40.
Okay, so maybe not the last. If we get one more over here. Yes?
Hi, I would like to bring up the topic of juice fasting in a little bit more of a detailed level tonight, as it's coming up very often, for two reasons. Firstly, because, well, I'm a raw foodist and a vegan for many years now, and I have a very healthy, balanced, proper, informed vegan diet. But this was not always the case. When I first discovered the benefits of juice fasting, I loved it, saw all the benefits that you guys talk about, but 1 month became once a month, twice a week, 3 times a week, and I ended up weighing 98 pounds.
Oh,
Right.
You were anorexic?
I was orthorexic, as many people are calling it, which is wonderful because I've read many of your articles. I was obsessed with all literature, but I didn't know how to do it properly. So I've learned how to do it properly, but I was really fascinated because you said you have gone 102 days on a juice fast, and you look alive and well and thriving.
He also walks on water.
So I don't know how that mixed with my chemistry during the juice fast, and it didn't work out as well as I hoped it would, and other people's reviews on how the process worked did not work the same for me. The second part of that is I'm broadening my literature that I read from as a less, because I don't want to be as biased. I was only raw food authors at one point, but now I'm trying to branch out. So I'm reading a lot more of the Huffington Post. And just last week, there was a huge Facebook post saying, I quote, "Another research study debunks the juice detox yet again," talking about how the proteins and the amino acid profile are completely dead within the first minute in juices after going through the blender or the juicer within the first minute. So what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you mixed in blender and juicer there at the end, and they're very different, right? Because a blender is a puree, and a juicer is an extraction. So in one case, the blender is, you're eating, a smoothie is a whole food. You're eating the whole food. You're actually not chewing it. The blender has taken care of that mechanical work for you. A juicer is a water extract of what's in that vegetable. Blenders, I have a big. I'm opposed to high-speed blending. I'm okay with low-speed blending. If you look at the Vitamix goes from 1,000 RPMs to 37,000 RPMs, and a lot of people, just turn it right up. But that's the equivalent to a 230 mile per hour wind. And let me tell you, even Hurricane Katrina was only 180 miles per hour, and buildings fell down. So, certain, nutrients are being oxidized to death when you're keeping it on. And I'm writing a recipe book now, and I talk about turning the blender on for 10 seconds. Short periods of time, minimize oxidation. But we're really talking about juice fasting. That was your question. And in juice fasting, everything you do, whether you're eating solid food or whether you're eating liquid food, whether you're eating juicers, it has to be balanced, all right? And I like to focus very much on the green vegetables. I want to juice the brassica family. I want to juice the kale and the collards and the parsley and the celery. I want to put some garlic in there, or alternatively, I want to put some ginger in there. I want the spinach. I want the medicine from those vegetables, and that's when I'm on a juice cleanse, I'm drinking a minimum of a quart of that. I'll have other drinks. I'll also have a quart of water. The flush that I'm leading a group right now in a week juice cleanse, and we try to consume 1 gallon of fluids in the course of every day. We aim for that. That's our goal. And it's water and it's juice, minimal amounts of the sweet juices. And even carrots and beets are very sweet. And, if you have sugar sensitivities, if you are prone to candida or any pathogens, they're going to love the sugar that they're getting from that beet juice, and they're going to love it, what they're getting from carrot juice, and even pineapple juice, which I love very much. But citruses like lemon, they're a little different. I do a lemon grapefruit cleanse as part of this. But you were losing excessive amount of weight, and it's hard to diagnose what the reasons for that are. But these programs have to be managed very carefully. They have to have balance in them. Even though we're dealing with liquids, you still have to have a balanced diet. And that might be a clue for you to consider.
I'll try to bullet point it because you said a lot of very important things for the listeners out there around the world as well as here. Number one, you didn't have a diet problem. You had an emotional problem. And why that happens to young women in our culture is that your image of what a woman or a girl should look like is twiggy, a size -0. And to live up to that because you don't feel strong enough about yourself, you just starve yourself under the auspices of health foods. And we see this. I don't believe in orthorexia. I just think this is another form of anorexia. Number two, when the human body is looked at biologically, not philosophically, when we get sick, it doesn't want to eat. So anyone that would try to debunk fasting doesn't know anatomy, biochemistry, or human history. It's factual that to detoxify, eliminate, to help to resist and eliminate disease and disorder as well as activate the immune system, the elimination of solid food needs to be part of the equation. And why that works, by the way, is you only have X amount of energy in your body. Let's picture 100% energy. And if you're putting in foods, certainly the bad foods that most people eat, probably 98% of the energy is going on pushing that waste out. But how about if you're not eating food, and then on top of that, you're eating nutritious food with life in it that are not blended and killed within a matter of 90 seconds, 90% of the nutrients are gone in a blender, high-speed blender. You're getting juices. But the other thing is that you juice food and let it sit out, in 15 minutes it's as dead as a doorknob too. It oxidizes. So fresh, raw green juices, and I completely concur, and stay away from the greens because most of you here are really systematic addicts to sugar. And your body doesn't care if you get it from white sugar, if you get it from carrot juice, you get it from beet juice, kombucha tea, agave syrup, xylitol, which is just out of a birch tree. It's not out of a maple tree. And this actually, xylitol is 68% sugar by weight. Maple syrup, 65% sugar. Honey, 98% sugar by weight. White sugar, 100% sugar. Brown sugar, 99.6% sugar. So these are sugars, and it doesn't determine. And, when we first at Hippocrates eliminated fruit from the diet of people with cancer, we were condemned. And, by the way, I didn't want to do it because I was eating half my raw diet was fruit then. It was a really easy diet at that stage. Just like most of the raw food enthusiasts still tell you high fruit diets are good for you. And we, by chance, not by intelligence, recognized that cancer tumors were growing when people were taking high amounts of fruit. And we did a little study. We had to do everything hidden at that stage. We took 9 of our affluent guests, pulled them aside and said, would you do blood test on your insurance? And took 5 of them off fruits and all fruit juices, and the other 4 we left on it. And within 2 months, we pulled fruit out of the diet for cancer. And within a year, after that, a little bit more than a year, we pulled it away from viruses and bacteria. We actually, in Petri dishes, under microscopes, looked at viruses, rhino and retroviruses. When we put fruit juice on it, it looked like the San Andreas winds behind a forest fire in California. It's just like this. Your eyes couldn't keep up with it. So today, by the way, MIT, Dr. Anna Marie and I just read a study last week. MIT further gave us wisdom and knowledge on this, the pathways of how sugar feeds disease. And every major cancer institute, including Sloan, some of the better educated doctors there now are telling their cancer patients not to eat fruit and take fruit juice because it feeds cancer and viruses and mold and bacteria and yeast equally to white sugar. So thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for my colleagues and friends. Get a good sleep because tomorrow we have a packed-filled day of knowledge and wisdom. Be well.